Start with a scripture reading, Genesis 30, verses 22 to 24. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb, and she conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph, and said, the Lord shall add to me another son.
If you would, turn over now to Genesis chapter 37, beginning in verse 1. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all of his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a varied colored tunic. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. And they said to him, please listen to this dream which I had. He said to them, for behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect, and behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. Then his brothers said to him, are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us? And so they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Now, he had still another dream and related it to his brothers and said, lo, I have had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. He related it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. I'll have another. Where does your mind go? Do you see somebody in a restaurant with their cup empty and they're ready for a refill? I'll have another. Where does your mind go? Are you thinking of something that is precious to you that you would like to have a copy of as well as have the original? I'll have another is what Rachel said whenever she saw her firstborn son. She named him Joseph, which means he adds. And so every time she calls Joseph by name, it is a prayer to God. Give me another. I'll have another, God. I'll have another son. Now, does that appear to you that she is really content with what she has been blessed with? Or is it always just a little bit more? And then I have to look at myself and ask, is that not me? Don't I quite often have the mindset that if I just get that, then I will be content, and then I get that, and then I need this to go with that, right? You know, whenever people are the most aware of being happy with little is whenever it's been taken from them. It's the person that has lost their home, but not their lives in a tornado or in a flood or some other sort of devastation, a fire. Those people are the ones that they interview, and they say, well, that's all replaceable. We have each other. We have our children. Sometimes they say, we have our pets, and we are happy. We are content. Why does it take the loss, quite often, of things for us to realize the blessings? We even sing a song that goes, when upon life's billows you are tempest-tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one. Have you found that to be a comfort in your life? Whenever those times that you are discouraged, that you step back and you take a deep breath and you recount those things that God has given to you. I hope that you do that more often than not. What is the first thing that comes to your mind? What is the first thing that is on that list? Is it a mate? Is it a child? I hope it's not a possession. Not that a possession can't be somewhere on the list, but I just hope it's not the first thing on your list. Is the first thing on my list my salvation? Can I not be content and happy with life as it is simply by knowing that I am in a right relationship with God? Shouldn't that be the one thing that makes everything else, no matter what the circumstances are, a positive? Back in the day, and I think that they still have this as their advertising campaign at times, Lay's potato chips had a saying, bet you can't eat just one. That's Rachel, right? She's tried, but she couldn't do it. She wanted one more. She said to God every time that she said Joseph's name, add to me another. She saw God as an account to withdraw from. He gave her another son. Yes, he answered her prayer, but at what cost? Benjamin, she didn't call him Benjamin because Benjamin means son of my right hand. That's what his daddy called him after his mama named him Ben-Oni shortly before dying, meaning son of my sorrow. Oh boy, that's pretty upbeat, isn't it? Give me another, and then whenever he does, oh, I am so unhappy. Isn't she a whole lot like us? Because happiness does not come from possessions. In fact, happiness doesn't even come from an accumulation of relatives. True happiness and contentment comes from a right relationship with God. But what did Joseph do with his name, which on the face, it seems to be somewhat negative? We have seen names and their meanings. His mother had that name, and almost as a presumptuous command of God, give me another son, whereas Joseph viewed it totally differently, because you can also interpret Joseph this way: he increases, or God gives the increase. Jesus said in John chapter 10, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. Joseph took his name and he redefined it. Joseph took his name and realized, and we're going to see this through the course of the lesson this morning, just how relevant that is to the way that he responds to his circumstances. Joseph took his name and he lived it. To God be the glory. It is God that gives the increase. How old was Joseph in this last chapter that we read? He was 17 years old, and he was at odds with his brothers. It's at this stage in Joseph's life that things change dramatically for him. He is the favorite son. Is life good for this 17-year-old boy? Oh boy. And it has been for some time, because he is the one that dad loves best. He has no problem even reporting on his brothers whenever they misbehave, and so that doesn't help circumstances. His daddy has given him a coat of honor, and I've heard that some interpret it to be a long coat with sleeves versus a multicolored coat. Doesn't depend, or depends upon how you interpret it, but either way, the boy wearing this coat shouts, my dad loves me most, and his brothers can't stand him. They can't stand the sight of him. They can't talk to him, and in fact, whenever they see him coming later on within that reading, they begin to plot against him. Let's just kill the boy and put him out of our misery. And Joseph goes from being the favorite son of his father to being betrayed by his 10 brothers, thrown into a pit with the anticipation of God only knows, before he is sold into slavery to the Midianites, who were traveling through in a caravan to Egypt. And his brothers take that coat and they tear it up and they put lamb's blood on it and they bring it before their father. And they leave him with the impression that they have found this coat and that his favorite son is gone. And they allow him to believe that for the next 10 years, for the next decade or so, him thinking that Joseph is dead. He goes from being the favorite son to a slave in the house of Potiphar. How do you feel? How would you feel? What did you do whenever you left home? For school? You say, well, I enrolled in college, or I got a job, I enrolled in Votech, I joined the military. Did you change whenever you left home? Well, we all change, don't we, whenever we leave home? I guess the question is did you change for the better whenever you left home? Whenever you were on your own and you could make your own decisions? How did you do? And you say, well, I wasn't 17 years old. Well, maybe some of you were perhaps 18 years old whenever you left home. How did you do? What happens to young people at that age? Well, it's a time of reckoning. It's a time of examination. It's a time to decide who I am and what I am outside of my father and my mother's influence, outside of the sphere of my family and my relatives. And sometimes we move hundreds of miles away. That was a tradition within my family. In order to go to college, you needed to move hundreds of miles away. We didn't often come back for Thanksgiving, much less for the weekends. I guess that kind of tells you something about just how hard they kicked you whenever you came out of that nest. But what did you do? How did you respond? Joseph, at age 17, betrayed by his brothers, bereft of his father, no familiar culture or country, and is thrown into a household where he is a slave. Well, how did you fare, Joseph? Do you have a chip on your shoulder? Could he have? Sure he could have. Could he have said, God is the God back there and he's not with me here? If he was with me here, he wouldn't have let all of this happen to me. No, that's not what he said, though. And Joseph has had dreams of a destiny that I'm sure that he didn't understand for a period of time, but nonetheless, dreams that said, you're important, boy, and you are going to have an influence upon the world. And at age 17, this young man becomes the best slave that Potiphar has. Now, you just think about that. What an attitude. It's not give me more. It's not I'll have another. It is in God is in the increase. And he remains faithful to God. But in the process, it blesses Potiphar's household. Potiphar, the captain of the bodyguard, looks at his slave and he determines, you know what? Any responsibility that I give to this young man, I not only can trust him to fulfill, I can trust him to increase my holdings. I mean, this boy has the Midas touch, and he puts Joseph in charge of all of his household. Now, I don't know how long Joseph was in Potiphar's house, but it was long enough to catch the attention of Potiphar's wife. Now, what has Joseph's attitude been thus far? No matter what the circumstances, I will be faithful. And Potiphar's wife comes to him and says, I want you for me. You're an attractive young man. And Joseph says, no way can I do that. That's not something that is within me. And in fact, look at what he says. This is Genesis chapter 39. There are going to be several statements of faith that we look at in accordance with Joseph's actions. But look at this one. First, verse 6, he left everything that he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, so he was an attractive young man. And it came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused. And he said to his master's wife, behold, with me here my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. And he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I. And he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then, listen to this, listen to Joseph and this profound statement of faith. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God? Now, let's just surmise that Joseph has been in his house for 8 years now. He's gone from being the age 17 to about age 25. We know by the time that he is in Pharaoh's court, it had been 2 years since he had interpreted the dream of the butler and the baker. And so he is 30 years old whenever he gets to Pharaoh's court. So he's 28 years old whenever he interprets the dream of the butler and the baker. He has been in prison long enough to prove himself there. I assume Joseph is maybe in his mid-20s, right? Maybe even 27, I don't know. But he says to Potiphar's wife, how can I do this? Not just you are his wife, you don't belong to me. How can I do this and sin against God? Is this a boy of faith? Is this a boy that is true? Is this a young man that is, regardless of the circumstances, wants to do what God desires first and foremost? Now, you just think about it. I mean, his mind could have been conniving like his father's probably was at that age. He could have been thinking by deception or by deceit, I can advance my cause. And what better way to gain influence within the household of Potiphar than to love his wife in this way, and she loved me back, and then me to have the influence upon the household? But he would not be untrue. First to his God, then to his master, and so he runs. He has gone from favorite son to slave, from slave to chief steward, but he is about to make another big change, from chief steward to falsely accused and imprisoned. because she brings it to her husband, and her husband immediately believes her, and he is cast into prison. And now, 25, 26 years old, 9 years in Egypt, faithfully serving God, having seen his star rising, all of a sudden he's worse off now, isn't he? He was at least free as a slave to move about as a chief steward. Now he is imprisoned. How would it affect you and I to be falsely accused? Life is not fair. There's no way I'm going to be happy. I've been dealt a bad hand of cards. I mean, if there was a God, he doesn't know that I exist. But what does Joseph do? Think about it. He becomes the best prisoner that the warden ever has. It's just amazing, isn't it? So much so that the guard or the warden of the prison turns to Joseph and he makes him a trustee. He says, I'm putting you in charge of all the other prisoners. You're going to be the one that I rely upon because I can see that everything you do is blessed. What is Joseph testifying to as he simply lives his life before others? That there is a God, that he is real, and that God gives the increase. He's redefining his name, isn't he? God gives the increase, and through God, I will have an abundant life. And so, it's as a trustee that he happens along two prisoners that are talking with one another. They are ones that have been in Pharaoh's court as his baker and as his butler, or as his cupbearer, if you will. And he says, I see that you're downcast. What's going on? And they say to him, well, we have had dreams. It's a little bit discouraging because we don't know what the dreams mean. And Joseph makes another statement of faith in chapter 40 and verse 8. He says to them, when they say, we had a dream and there is no one to interpret it, Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please. What has Joseph just said? He could have said, well, I can interpret dreams. Tell it to me. He could have put himself in the spotlight, but he didn't. And instead, he said, is it not God alone who is able to interpret dreams? He says, tell it to me. In other words, I have a connection. How can I do this and sin against God? He told Potiphar's wife. A lot of good that did him. Here he tells the baker and the cupbearer, God is the one who interprets dreams. So tell it to me. And they tell him the dream about the birds, or about the cup, and the wine in the 3 days, about the birds and the baskets and the 3 days. And that Joseph says to the cupbearer, in 3 days, you are going to be back in Pharaoh's court, and whenever you get there, please don't forget me. Please don't forget me. And then he says to the baker, and your dream, in 3 days, you are going to be lifted up, but it's going to be your head. You're not going to survive this, because in 3 days, Pharaoh is going to execute you. And that's why he didn't say to him, don't you forget me. He didn't want the butler to remember him. And it came true. It all came true. And the butler promptly forgot him. A lot of good that did him. Can you imagine being Joseph and sitting on pins and needles, continuing to be the best trustee that the prison warden has ever had, and he witnesses the baker being released for execution. He sees the butler being released, and he's thinking, oh boy, I know he's going to tell him. Here it comes. I'm going to be out soon. And then he waits a month, 6 months, a year. 2 years goes by without any results. What are you doing this for, Joseph? Why in the world do you keep remaining faithful to God? Haven't you seen that all it's gotten you is betrayal, false accusations, imprisonment, and nobody is sympathetic to what your cause is? Give it up, Joseph. But not Joseph. Pharaoh has a dream and nobody can interpret it. And the butler comes to Pharaoh and he says, I'm ashamed of myself. He says to him, I should have told you this earlier, but he said there was a Hebrew lad in prison and he interpreted dreams and they both came true. He told the baker that he would be killed and it happened. He told me that I would be released and it happened. And he has connections. And all of a sudden, those boyhood dreams of Joseph begin to fall into place and he is called to the house of Pharaoh. But we have another statement of faith. Look with me in chapter 41 of Genesis, verse 14. We'll begin with an emphasis on verse 16. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurried and brought him out of the dungeon. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I have heard it said about you that whenever you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph answered, yeah, that's me. I'm the savant, right? No, Joseph said to Pharaoh, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh the favorable answer." And he interprets Pharaoh's dream. And you know that dream that he tells him about the 7 fat, sleek cows that come up out of the Nile. And then following them are the 7 lean cows that you can almost picture them with their ribs poking out. And then those lean cows eat the fat cows and they still stay ugly. And then he says there was a stalk of corn that bore 7 ears of corn that sprung up. And then 7 lean ears sprung up, and they ate the fat ones, and they remained plump, or not plump. But what does it mean? What does Joseph tell Pharaoh? It's not enough that he starts this conversation with Pharaoh by saying that God will give him a favorable answer, but look at verse 25 of chapter 41. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, "Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he is about to do." And then he says in verse 31 and following, "So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of that subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about." Why is Joseph interpreting this dream? Why is he helping a government for whom he is a prisoner and a slave? Why isn't Joseph sitting back and at least getting some sort of a guarantee from Pharaoh? "Yeah, I've got the answers there, fella, but I'm not going to give them to you until you promise to give me some sort of commutation to my sentence or a pardon or something." Do you hear any of that from Joseph? Is he "I'll take another"? Is he "I'll be happy if you give me my freedom, then I will"? None of that. And in fact, Joseph is still simply trusting in God. And even doing what is best for an enemy, he's telling Pharaoh exactly what Pharaoh needs to hear from God, because Joseph knows that he is simply a mouthpiece for those things that God is trying to reveal to Pharaoh. Can Joseph know what the future holds? I don't think so. But he knows who holds the future and that God gives the increase. Can you identify with this young man? A teenager, a young man, now in his 30s, trusting in God? Joseph, I mean, what do you have to show for all of your faith? Hey, boy, what is it that God has done for you? Firstborn to slave, slave to steward, steward to falsely accused to imprisoned, interpreter of dreams and promptly forgotten, now standing before Pharaoh and not insisting on something in return. Joseph, you're a fool. Joseph, you don't see things in reality. You're simply trusting in that which you can't lay hold of, that you can't understand because of some dream that you had as a boy. But we know the rest of the story, don't we? It's because of Joseph's consistent, faithful responses to those choices that he makes. First, to honor God. Second, to honor authority. Third, to walk a morally pure life. And fourth, to always tell the truth. Those are the principles upon which Joseph lived. Would that we would do the same. Would our lives be better? Would our communities be better? Would our country be better if we understood that it is God who is in control? It's not about me. It never has been. It's all to his glory. And then what does God do through the course of the story of Joseph? Those dreams that Joseph had, that God gave him, they all come true. And those brothers, though they refute his dreams, they find themselves bowing at the feet of their father's favorite son. But even then, Joseph testifies to his brothers. What does he say? Turn with me to chapter 45 and verse 4. He says, "Please come closer to me." And they came closer, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now, do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." And you say, "Wow, what a coincidence. Isn't that just amazing how all that fell into place?" It's almost like the Big Bang in Joseph's life. Just boom, it happened. No, what does Joseph know? It's not that he understood all along, but looking back, he understood it now. And isn't that the same for us? It's not that we understand why each day's trials come. It's that I give them to God whenever they come. And I remain faithful to him no matter what my age. I trust him to deliver. And in the end, my faith will be purified like pure gold. Turn with me to the New Testament passage in 1 Peter chapter 1. Think of Joseph But of course, think of yourself. Apply it to yourself. Did you have a good week this week? An outstanding week this week? A bad week this week? What kind of a week did you have? Who did you give credit to? And who did you blame? What did you do with it? Even now, as you're wrestling with what happened this past week, are you coming up with answers? Are you discovering the reason? Do you know why you're here this morning? Enduring another sermon of mine? James said, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you fall into diverse temptation, knowing that the trying of your faith produces patience." Well, Peter said it this way in 1 Peter chapter 1, beginning in verse 6. "In this you greatly rejoice, even though now, for a little while, if necessary, you have been distressed by various trials, so that the proof of your faith, being more precious than gold, which is perishable, even though tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And though you have not seen him, you love him. And though you do not see him now, but you believe in him, you greatly rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, obtaining as the outcome of your faith the salvation of your souls." What is it? What is your most precious possession? What is it that you have that you would never give up? You know, what Joseph never forgot is that God adds and that God gives the increase, and no matter what happens to me, if I die in him, then I am blessed. I don't think that he saw how it was all going to play out any more than we do. I think he had an inkling, but don't we? Don't you believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead? That he is seated at the right hand of the throne of God? Don't you believe that he has gone to heaven to prepare a place for us, that he will return, that we might be with him? Don't you believe? Then act upon that belief. Trust the Heavenly Father who, through you, can gain even greater heights of glory within the lives of others, but only if you, at whatever stage of life that you are in, a favorite son or a slave, falsely accused or imprisoned, trustee or second command in Egypt, God can use you to save your soul and the souls of others. My brothers, don't distress. God sent me before you so that life might be preserved. And he did. And not just his own, and not just the lives of his brother and his family, but Joseph saved Egypt and set them up to become a world power, so that whenever it was time for God to humble them, it was by the very hand of the children that he had placed there. Doesn't God have a plan? And he has a plan for you as well. Have you put your faith in him like Joseph, that God will give the increase? If not, won't you come this morning as we stand and as we sing?